Wobbling was banned in Melee a couple years ago now. It's funny because usually even the more casual audiences know what wobbling is, and they are somewhat aware of the discourse that used to take place around it. And I kind of wanted to get my thoughts out there on how things went back then, how things are going now, and how things might play out in the future. So what you're seeing on screen right now is a game that took place before wobbling was banned. It's a pretty good example of why wobbling was good, and just a good showcase of what it is and what it's good for. Right now we're seeing the ice climbers get destroyed, but we'll see that when wobbling's there, there's always a way. And you might be able to say there's always a way, right? Even if you don't have wobbling, even if Fox, doesn't have his shine, he can still make comebacks against people without it, but it's definitely easier if you have that option. Cool, so what is wobbling? Wobbling is when one ice climber grabs the opponent while the other ice climber is still alive and close to them and synced with them, and then they just keep hitting the opponent over and over again until the opponent is no longer there. We see that right here. Bananas, the ice climbers, is down 4 stocks to 1. Doesn't give up though, on FD with both climbers. We all know what's possible. And we gotta check out what Leffen's able to do against this. He gets down through up smashed, gets grabbed in the corner, and then there's the wobble. So this is what wobbling is. Main climber grabs the opponent, then pummels them. Then after the pummel's done, the other climber does a down tilt. Because the opponent can't leave the grab while they're in this kind of grab hit stun, that is first incurred by the pummel, and then right after by the down tilt or forward tilt. Leffen just can't get out. Okay, so this is what wobbling is, and we're gonna see it 2 more times here to close out the game. And I honestly think, when people ask me my opinion on wobbling, I just used to say I find it funny, because honestly, how can you say that this isn't hilarious? But anyways, wobbling used to be, the tournament rule sets were not really unified in the older days of Melee. I'm speaking like 15 years ago or so. And then EVO 2013 happened, which was the biggest Melee tournament at the time back then, and the TO of that event decided to make wobbling legal. And then Wobbles made a great run into the end of the bracket, didn't quite win, but made it really far. And then other tournaments decided, hey, EVO was the biggest event, we'll just copy the rule set, and then wobbling was legal for the next couple of years. Alright, so what changed, what happened, and why did they take this beautiful thing we're currently seeing on the screen away from us? Cool. So, in around 2019, Genesis was being streamed, one of the biggest events of the year, and people were starting to get annoyed by the amount of ICs that were put on stream. There were a lot of Ice Climbers players matches being streamed. People didn't really enjoy that, especially because most of these ICs would wobble a lot, because that's what you do when you're trying to win. So none made this tweet. I'm not saying it started with this. There have always been discussions around the topic of rebanning wobbling around 2018, 2019. But this was the really first big one that I saw, where none talked about that all the IC's players on stream are just wobbling, and that he thinks that it's going to kill Melee off if we don't do something about wobbling, just mostly because of the spectator experience. What people responded to with were like, anyone worried about Melee dying? Clearly it wasn't around during the Brawl days. I'm pretty tired of seeing all this Melee versus Ultimate horse shit. Okay, this is more about Melee versus Ultimate, but I think, these two things were somewhat directly related, because people started complaining about the wobbling, and then people started complaining about the people who were complaining about the wobbling, and that's how it went. Okay, there's also a Reddit post about this tweet, which I think is really funny, so I wanted to show it off. This is Non's opinion on Ice Climbers wobbling, and I agree in the title. That's already a very powerful title. And then my favorite line is, where is it? As a spectator, this is really off-putting. The amount of times I've seen this weekend has almost turned me off. I'm a hardcore professional Smash watcher, but a lot of people will just actually turn it off because it's not fun to watch. Fair. So this was more or less the beginning of the real debate, where people actually started considering banning wobbling again. The responses to this, so this was on February 2nd, 2019. Responses to this were mostly negative. Of course, the tweet has a lot of likes and a lot of people agreed. But back then, the more casual opinion was more like, yo, infinites exist in fighting games. Ice climbers aren't even like a top 5 character in the game, even with wobbling. So banning this, wouldn't be the greatest thing. That's what a lot of people said. So this person here said the obvious solution that makes everyone happy would be to just not stream the no-name Ice Climbers players, because when there's people that aren't as commonly known in the community playing Ice Climbers, people aren't invested in the match and they will be turned off a bit more by the wobbling taking place. So honestly, I don't like that solution either, but this is the kind of stuff we were talking about here. And then another comment, the day we start making rules for the spectator's sake is the day Melee truly dies. Of course, these are Reddit comments. These could be people who've been attending tournaments for 15 years, or it could also just be hardcore professional Smash watchers who haven't actually attended events ever. Not saying that this person is one of those, but you never know. Then a couple days later, roughly a week later, or 5 days later, Axe just straight out said wobbling needs to be banned. I've said this for years, it's pretty terrible for the integrity of competitive Melee. Of course, back then people would respond to this by saying, oh, you play Pikachu, of course you don't like wobbling, you already have a bad matchup against Ice Climbers. I don't think what character you play should matter. I think you should bring up good arguments for why it should or shouldn't be banned. His argument here is that it's pretty terrible for the integrity of competitive Melee. Alright, I don't think that is a good enough argument in and of itself, because there isn't really okay, in what way is it terrible for the integrity? That would be the real argument. Then he says near zero risk, easy execution, zero defense options. Alright, those are points you can bring up, but then you could also go the Pokemon way about it, like the Pokemon tiering system, where if a Pokemon is good in a certain tier and it is too strong for that tier, since people are playing to win, the meta will centralize around that Pokemon, or around that technique in this case. And when everyone's using that technique, you see that there's an issue here. Or when that technique seems to be too prevalent or just too powerful, then something needs to be done about it, which wasn't the case with wobbling back then. Sure, you can say that at low levels, maybe a couple of people were winning 1 or 2 more sets than they should because of wobbling. Not saying at every event, but maybe here and there, a wobbler would get wins they usually wouldn't get, and that could be an issue. But you're seeing here that just 5 days later, there's already more agreement to the sentiment. Of course, there's still people disagreeing with it. None, of course, agrees with it again, because, we already know that. Yeah, Kage says this happened because we wanted to so badly be accepted by the FGC, the fighting game community, and then Evo decided to keep wobbling legal. From that point, it just became this kind of silent standard going forward. Not many even bothered to question it again, which is fair. And I think the discussion about it is good and fine. We just have to look at the actual arguments that are being presented. So when Axe made this tweet, of course, we're looking at the Reddit discussion just to see what the rough sentiment was like around that time. The most upvoted comment says that the real problem with Ices is that wobbling is always their best option, and it makes them good but not great. If climbers were trash even with wobbling, no one would care because they would still just lose. If they were top tier, that would mean that either they would have to have better options than wobbling so you wouldn't see it that much, or that wobbling is so busted we'd have to ban it. Unfortunately, they're in this weird middle ground where they can carry you pretty far, but you can't actually win anything beyond a local. But man, can you wobble the shit out of the local. So it seems like this argument here, I agree with the first 2 sentences. And then the argument is that wobbling makes it easy to win at a local level, so at a lower level of play. Which I don't think is really the case. Most locals have, either a couple or at least one top 100 player, or they have a few players who are close to that level. And once you're anywhere close to top 100 level, you're never gonna win by just wobbling. Around that level, you need to be so much better at the game. And I think that where wobbling can carry you is at a really low level, right? If you're someone who consistently goes 0-2 and you're playing a losers bracket against someone who tends to go 1-2, then the 0-2, or if you allow them to wobble, they might be able to take the set over the 1-2. And of course, this still applies to higher levels as well, right? The best ICs in the world who might lose to, I don't know, Cody game 5, Cody Schwab being one of the best players in the world, that ICs, if they were allowed to wobble, might have barely won, but you don't know that, right? Yes, it does make the character better, but I'm not fully sure if it really is, or if it was the the local scene destroyer as badly as people are making it out to be. Okay, we see here that people are saying stuff like just DI out of the wobble, it's not that hard. Of course, that's a like joke comment because you can't DI out of it. People are saying, look, it's inevitable that it's banned again. People argue about where ICs would be on the tier list if wobbling got banned. Yeah, that's another topic that we can get into later. Yeah, this is where the discussion was at the time. And then eventually local scenes started banning wobbling, and then once most local scenes had converted to it, the major TOs eventually decided to also ban wobbling at their events. Yeah, and the thing is that for a lot of these points, like wobbling drives away low and mid-level players because as a tactic it absolutely destroys them. I don't know, that's hard to say, because at the time where Melee was the biggest, between 2013 and like 2018, 2019, just before COVID, that's when Melee was at its biggest, and that's when wobbling was illegal. But of course there are a lot of other factors going into that. So at least you can say that wobbling didn't, like maybe if wobbling had been banned, maybe Melee would be 10 times bigger even than it is now, but I don't think so. I think that ice climbers, even with wobbling, were rare enough that it didn't really affect most players. Obviously it did affect everyone, but I'm saying that it didn't affect them to an extent where it would drive them away from the game. Especially because a bad wobbler is still just a bad melee player who has one way of KOing you, and you can play around that one way of KOing you, because it's not like ice climbers have like a huge grab or amazing movement options to get the grab. Wobblers tended to be really bad at the game, like the people who only wobbled. So if you were able to figure out how they, like what their most common way of fishing for a grab was, and you just managed to beat that, you would be good. Because it's not like they can always wobble. Nana needs to be alive, Nana needs to be with the climber. They need to have enough time to like stall for Nana if she isn't there currently after grabbing you. So yeah, that's how we got to a point where wobbling was banned again. And then yeah, we spent the next 5 years or so playing without wobbling, and ice climbers disappeared a little bit because a lot of the ice climbers players who were active back then just quit the game. If they didn't quit outright, they at least became way less active, and then eventually slowly just kind of faded away and stopped entering events slowly over time, not like as a decision out of spite. A lot of ice climbers players who used to wobble back in the days, they either continued playing. A lot of them tried playing different characters now that they couldn't wobble anymore, and yeah, some probably did just leave right away because they didn't like that change. So the character was kind of in a slump until Slug arrived, and I think it was about 2022 when Slug started getting really good results, but definitely in 2023 when Slug really like broke through and became a top 10 level player in the world. And he kind of showed that ice climbers are still like viable even without wobbling. Because if you're a top 10 player in the world, then surely you're not the character can't just like win locals. The character can make it really far in large events, and that's usually what people talk about when we're talking about like viability, right? Some people say you have to be able to win the biggest events in the world. I don't necessarily agree with that, just because a lot of the time people will say a character isn't viable because they haven't won an event like that, when in reality most character results are a lot more reliant on the player than on the character in many cases, which is why players like Leffen, who's on screen right now, can go Mewtwo and beat top 50 level players without having practiced Mewtwo that much, just because the player makes such a big difference. So if Leffen just plays Mewtwo for a month or so, he will be the best Mewtwo of all time if he kept entering events with it, because the player just makes up for so much. And it's not just about the character's tools. Yes, it is about the character's tools, but it's about finding a person who knows how to use those tools and who likes practicing that character and who like clicks with them. All right. So what if we keep going about like in regards to the reasons wobbling was banned? Oh yeah, here's the funny. This is something Nintendo had said in early 2020. Ice Climbers players have been absolutely getting bullied out of the game. If Melee had its own hate speech, Wobbler would be it. almost all of the top 100 ICS players from recent years are inactive or retired right now, and there are quite a few of them. Of course, he then apologizes for using the word hate speech because it kind of diminishes the harm actual hate speech does to people who are affected by it. So he rephrases, if socially acceptable in this community, or it is socially acceptable in this community to mock and ridicule people for playing ice climbers and using mechanics that are allowed by the rules, that's a problem. Yeah, I mean, there's one response saying Nintendo is a B word and wobblers can F right off. You heard it here first. Yeah, we hate you. That's kind of what the sentiment was when wobbling was still legal, and when it was banned, people were like, oh yeah, good riddance, like we're glad that that's gone. And when some Ice Climbers players stopped playing, there are even some responses of like, oh yeah, right, if they didn't enjoy Melee without wobbling, they didn't enjoy the game at all, so it's good that they're gone. And I don't like that. I feel like Melee is all about people figuring out what they like doing in this game that lets you do so much. And, you know, if something like that is taken away from you, something that was the core aspect of your way of playing the game for years, maybe even a decade, then yeah, I totally get why people would stop playing, right? Okay, so this is where we got, and again, the arguments that were brought up, the one we've seen from Axe was the near zero risk, easy execution, zero defense options. I mean, the way I view wobbling is that I view wobbling more as like a kill move, right? People often tend to look at wobbling like as a combo, and that doesn't... It's not really a combo in the way that Melee has combos, right? If I'm playing Melee and I'm playing this Fox right here, and I grab the Ice Climbers, I go for an up throw up air or something, that's a combo, right? Like I throw them up, they can DI the up throw, then they can DI the up air, they can smash the out of the up air, they can choose where they will get sent by each of those moves, and they can choose if those moves land at all by using smash DI. When you're getting wobbled, neither of that exists. You're just stuck in this loop forever, and the Ice Climber player can keep going until they wish to finish it. Back then we had a rule that you couldn't go above 300%, so this isn't really a combo, right? Because all of the defensive aspects to a combo that exist in Melee just don't work here. The way I like to compare it, or like I said, I think wobbling is more of a kill move, right? Once you're in the wobble, once the first Nana forward tilt hits, this is a kill move that has hit you, right? It's like as if a Jigglypuff had just rested you and you're just flying off the stage and into the blast zone really slowly. So this is why I view wobbling as a kill move. I'm not saying that wobbling is like Puff's rest. I think wobbling is more like when Puff has up-thrown a Spacey and they have missed their DI at kill percent, right? Say they have this percent, set their DI to none. This right here is what wobbling is like. You know, when the Spacey now no longer has any options because they will be stuck in hit stun, and I can just, if I execute correctly, they will be dead, right? This is what I view wobbling as. I view it as this kind of, I view it as this kind of kill move, like a situation where an opponent has already, you know, been hit by something, or they're in a position where they can't do anything about it, and then they just get KO'd by like the opponent executing something correctly. That isn't necessarily too hard. So other example would be, you know, let's say Puff at this percent does what I just did, up throw and misses rest, and then the Fox is like, well, you're on the ground, let me just charge the up smash, right? That's kind of what wobbling is. You're in a position where you have already been like put in a position where you can only die unless the opponent messes up. And the annoying part about wobbling is that it takes so long. If you just explode it off the screen, I don't think people would mind it too much, but like we saw earlier, wobbling takes a long time. So you can say, hey, it takes too long, it should be banned because of that. Alright, I mean, yes, it does take a while, right? If I just start wobbling and keep going until 300, that'll take quite a bit. It'll take like, I don't know, if I really go all the way, like 25 seconds, maybe a bit less, which is quite long. But if you do that 4 times, that's still less than 2 minutes, if my math isn't completely wrong. And, you know, usually the ICs wouldn't go that long. Maybe if they were trying to actually get the time out, they would do this, but usually they would just go until like their threshold was reached, and later on I saw some tournaments using a threshold of 200% to make it go by a bit quicker. So something taking long, like a combo finisher taking long, is that a reason to ban it? I think if the character using that strategy of using the tool to stall for time were to become overpowered, and it would make them really strong in the metagame, that they would win matchups they otherwise wouldn't because they could stall with the time, like they could make it so that the timer runs out using the technique, then I'd say that sure, that might be broken and it might be ban-worthy, but just it takes a long time on its own isn't necessarily ban-worthy. You know, when Samus is off stage and recovering with her bombs, that takes a long time, but just something taken a long time on its own isn't a reason to ban it. Alright, so let's talk about the next thing, which is that wobbling is a near zero risk. So like I said earlier, if you want to get the wobble, you need to have both climbers next to you. Let's say Nana is like, I don't know, doing something back here, I get the grab, I can't wobble, especially at low percent. I need Nana with me so that when I get the grab, I can actually like start the wobble with her, right? Because if I get the grab like this and Nana isn't there, the opponent just gets out. And that isn't to speak of the fact that for the wobble to work, you have to get the first pummel from Popo and the first forward tilt from Nana. But the opponent can often just mash out before the first pummel, especially at low percent. And decent players, when they will know roughly when they're about to get grabbed and just start mashing their controller to help them get out of the grab before it even happens. And then once they're in the grab, they might escape before the first pummel even comes out. So yes, the wobble itself, once you have the opponent in it, is zero risk, right? But this is like Puff has done the up throw and Puff has hit the rest, right? Of course, with the rest, you might say there's the difference that Puff can get punished for it, but that's not the point right here, because the point is more of like what wobbling is conceptually, and not about like the balance or how exactly it matches up to other moves. It's just that wobbling is a situation where it's not a combo, it's a kill move that is currently hitting you, and it just takes a while for the kill move to actually KO you, right? But once you've been hit by it, you can say goodbye to your stock. Okay, what was I saying? Yeah, so sure, like the wobble itself, once you have hit, like once you've started, is zero risk. But trying to get the grab is a decent risk, especially because it's not like you're Marth and you can just grab people from like this distance, right? Like not actually, Marth can't do that, but Marth can grab people from pretty far. Ice climbers have a really small grab range, so I can go really far, really close up to this fox and my grab won't hit. And I'm also a character who I can't really dash dance grab as easily, because if I do, Nana will just get lost completely, and then if I get the grab, she won't be there to start the wobble with me. So usually when Ice Climbers players got the grab, they would first go for something like this, right? Like this down throw down air regrab, from which they could then start the wobble. But sure, you can't get out of the wobble, but you can get out of the down throw down air regrab. So sure, you can say that something has near zero risk. That's fine to say, but I don't think something being low risk and high reward makes it ban-worthy. If it were to be ban-worthy, I think it would have to be so low risk and such high reward that it would make the character very, very strong and overpowered, and potentially also over-centralizing in the metagame. So in the sense that people tend to pick that character because it's the best one to win with, right? Like just like how people did with Meta Knight and Brawl, it was just the best character, so people would pick him because that's the character you used to win, because he was so much better than everyone else. Like I said earlier, Ice Climbers, even with wobbling, that's not what they were. They were still like a high-tier character with potential to get upsets against some of the best players in the world, but they also clearly had their limits, right? They technically lose pretty much all of the high-tier matchups except for Sheik. They get destroyed really badly by Peach, to such an extent that when Armada was playing, the best Peach player of all time, whenever Ice Climbers players would take a single game of Armada, that would be like a huge deal, right? If they managed to only lose 3-1 to Armada, that was a big thing, and it happened like 3 times or so, and each one of those led to a lot of talk about it, because it's such a bad matchup, and they managed to win 1 game, and that was with wobbling, right? So even with wobbling, just taking a singular game off of Armada was like a big thing. Of course, Armada was also just way better than those Ice Climbers players in general at the game. But yeah, my point is that, yes, sure, there's 0 defensive options, right? It's a kill move that has hit you. Of course, once you're hit by the kill move, there's no defensive options. The execution is easy. Yes, it is. Like, there's a lot of, kill moves that can hit you with easy execution once a certain condition has been met. And the low risk, again, if it's such low risk and high reward, then isn't it natural to assume that it should be overpowered to an extent where it makes the character overpowered, but it wasn't. So I don't know. I feel like the best argument for banning wobbling is just being subjective about it, because objectively, I don't think any of these arguments hold up. Because when we say, oh, wobbling takes too long, and sure, there's a way around that. We can limit it to like 150%, then it's going to take like 15 seconds max. And so even if you get wobbled like 4 times the most amount you can get wobbled in a game, it'll be like a minute off the clock. And most melee matches end within 1 to 5 minutes. So even with that wobbling, you still wouldn't get anywhere close to the 8-minute timer. Yeah, let me think. What else people say to ban wobbling? Let's see what people in this thread talked about. So yeah, people here are talking about the well, ICs aren't winning anyway argument against banning wobbling. So if it's so risk-free and there's zero defense options, how come ICs don't dominate? That's pretty much the argument I'm making. And then people are talking about wobbling drives away low and mid-level players because as a tactic it absolutely destroys them. Citation needed. Like, that could be the case, and we can talk to people where that's the case, but I'm sure we'll also find players who will play one game against their local good Falco, not be able to move ever, and just never come to the local again, right? If you're losing to someone who is really only beating you because of wobbling, then it's usually pretty easy to improve where that's no longer happening, because if they're using a one-dimensional game plan, then you just have to figure out one solution to that one-dimensional game plan, and then you can start winning against them, right? Sure, getting wobbled sucks, but if you're a bad spacey who gets up throw arrested by a puff 4 times each game, of course, again, not saying that up throw arrest is the same as wobbling, I'm just saying that there's stuff that is frustrating to play against, and if it really drives away people, I'm not sure, I haven't seen statistics, and people would say this, but yeah, I don't know, would have to have some sort of survey, or like if there are a ton of players who say, hey, this drove me away from the game, like just because of wobbling I stopped entering, then sure, that might be an argument. But with ice climbers making up like, I don't know, let me look up like melee character usage statistics, because I don't think ice climbers were that common even when wobbling. So here we have character breakdowns in 2022. So this is from StartGG. Of course, this was after the wobbling ban, and we see that ice climbers are less common than Fox, Falco, Mirth, Falcon, Sheik, Puff, Peach, Luigi, Samus, Ganon, Doc, ice climbers. So they're like, I don't know how many characters that 1, 2, 3, 4, I can't count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12th in terms of usage. Let's say before wobbling they were about 8th in terms of usage. They're probably about like 5% of the player population or so. So sure, if you had 2 ice climbers at your local of 8 players and you kept playing against those 2 people, that might be annoying, but at majors it was highly unlikely you would run into an ice climbers player. Just, the average person plays like 3 sets at a major, because the 0 and 2ers and 1 and 2ers make up like half of the attendees or more. So it was just very unlikely that you actually had to play against ICs often enough to really have them ruin the experience for you. And what happens on a local level is so individualized and so hard to track that I'm not sure if this is like really true, and if this is more the case with wobbling, or if wobbling is worse in this respect than a lot of other things that new players or low-level players have to contend with. Okay, in order to avoid wobbling, these players must separate the climbers to kill Nana and just be good enough to not get grabbed. Yeah, grabs are often unavoidable for them. There is a great crew battle I watched a decently long time ago. I'm not going to name any names, but some people will know what I'm talking about. It was 2 decently low-level players. One of the players was very, very new, the other player was a wobbling ice climber. And what the Falco did, who was the very new player, was walk up to the ices, do this, and then do this. And then the ices would try to move around it. They would shield the first one, the shield grab would miss, and then they would completely eat shit, like this. Because yes, like getting grabbed is like avoiding all grabs is hard, but ice climbers also have such a hard time getting grabs compared to other characters. Like any Marth here just holds shield grabs you, but ice climbers slide so far on the ground that in order to punish this, ice climbers need to get a really clean wave dash out of shield into grab into combo start. And if you're doing that, you're not a low level player anymore. In which case, like, you know, if you can punish Falco F smash like this, like I can't do that, and I'm a top 100 player in the world, I just always get shined. So yeah, yes, getting grabs and wobbling can be very easy, but the counterplay to it can be just as easy. It can just be a Marth like forward smashing 5 times in a row, because in order to punish that, the ice climbers have to be able to predict when you're going to forward smash, shield it, wave dash out of shield very cleanly, grab you, and then convert off of the grab, which also isn't easy because the Marth has plenty of time to pre-mash as their forward smash gets shielded. So yeah, I just don't see how it is really that strong and powerful, even at low levels, that it would like destroy low and mid-level melee. Yeah, there used to be, like on power rankings, there would be Ice Climbers players. They used to be a lot more common on local and regional power rankings. Usually they wouldn't be at the super top of the power rankings. If they were probably also like top 100 or top 50 players in the world. And I don't think that's the argument being made, that it's broken at a top level. Most of the arguments I've seen here is that, like, first of all, we saw from Axe that it's terrible for the integrity of competitive melee. Yeah, that's subjective. 0 risk is execution, 0 defensive options. That's arguable, and it's arguable to what extent this is the case, and if that extent is bad enough that it actually matters. And again, I think it isn't, because if it was, then people would more often switch to that character, maybe even as a secondary, because it's so easy. Then I'm sure a top level player would just play Ice Climbers against lower level players, because if it's so easy and if you're just a slightly better player than the opponent, you could easily abuse that. But Ice Climbers have very strong weaknesses, like what I showed earlier. They have the weakness that, I don't know, if Falco ever hits a shine on you, Nana gets taken for a ride and then she's gone, and now you can't wobble anymore, even if Popo survives, right? So yes, they can kill you off of one grab, but let's say Ice Climbers have this amount of damage, they get hit by one Falco forward smash, oh nice, now I do it again. Now they can't wobble anymore. Was that harder than getting like a grab successfully and wobbling as Ice Climbers? I don't know. Hard to tell. Back in the days when that was being discussed, I was against a wobbling ban, and at the time, like, I was a full-on Fox main. I only played Ice Climbers like when I was trying to meme on people just to wobble them as a joke, but I didn't play them in tournament. I had no intention of ever playing them in tournament. So it's not like my mind has changed. I feel like my opinion has stayed consistent from when I was a Fox main in the top 100 to now that I'm an Ice Climbers player who is a little bit better than I used to be as Fox. That I think there just aren't that many great arguments to ban it that aren't fully subjective. But like, what would I personally do if I could decide whether wobbling was like banned or unbanned? My opinion would be that it should probably just stay banned, because we've gotten through the worst part now. Sure, some ICS players have quit, but I think the character has like found its footing again. The people who used to pick Ice Climbers when wobbling was legal were a very certain kind of player, right? Because the kind of player who enters a fighting game and sees that there's a character with a 0 to death, like infinite combo, and decides to pick that character is probably someone who enjoys that aspect of a character, like that high risk, having that high risk or decently like middle risk, high reward option at all times. And the reason why Ice Climbers aren't broken even with wobbling is because in the ways that people play around wobbling are the ways that Ice Climbers struggle to deal with, right? If, let's say, the only way to deal with wobbling was to go to platforms, but then Ice Climbers, I don't know, had like Marth up air, for example, right? Then, you know, we might be in a tough spot because your only option is to be right here, get grabbed and get wobbled, or you, the Fox, you can go up here, like to the platforms where you're not going to get wobbled, but then your opponent just has this move to hit you with forever, right? Because Marth up air is one of the best at poking through platforms. So Ice Climbers weren't broken with wobbling, because if you played around wobbling, Ice Climbers didn't have enough other stuff to make them still broken. If they couldn't abuse the way that you played around Wobbling enough to make them like a top 3 character in the game. Of course, they were really good, and I think they were underrated back then, especially with, you know, how the meta has advanced and what we know now. But I think even with Wobbling, Ice Climbers aren't the best in the game, and yeah, that's where I'm at. So yeah, my main point is I'm not just saying that, oh, it wasn't technically broken, it wasn't the best thing in the game, so it shouldn't have been banned. I'm also saying that because that argumentation doesn't work, I find it hard to find any good like objective arguments for it. The argument of like a majority of the player base doesn't like it, so we should ban it. That's another one, right? Like that's already it's kind of trying to turn the subjective opinion of a lot of players into an objective argument. And I think there's a lot to think about there. That's something you can do, but if we do that, you know, where do we draw the line? Because we have like half the player population plays either Fox or Falco. That's just how it is. If we go back to that, well, character usage chart, Fox makes up like, I don't know, like 28% of players. Falco's like 24 or 23 or something. It's pretty close between the two, but those two make up about half of the players, and this graph is a little bit misleading in that regard, but that's how it is. So if we just let the majority decide on what should be legal and what shouldn't be, like let's say, I don't know, Samus figures out like a new tech that suddenly makes her a lot better, right? She might not be the best in the game, but she becomes a lot stronger now. And just everyone who doesn't play Samus agrees that we don't like playing against this should be banned. But there is no good objective reason to ban it, because it isn't like, it doesn't lead to a situation where the game cannot be played out anymore. It just makes it so that when Samus hits you with a down tilt, you die instantly, for example. Should that be banned? Is it a good enough argument to say, oh, like 80% of the population, of the player population don't like playing against this, we should ban it? I think you can make the argument that that's good enough reason. But again, if it made the character broken, where they actually became the best or one of the best characters in the game, and they were unfun to play against, then I would be much more in agreement with that. But if it's on a character who's still like, I don't know where they were on the tier list, like 8th or something, with Wobbling, and who still was only played by like 5% of the population in Melee, yeah, I think just the ratio of how strong they were and how common it made the character just wasn't high enough to ban it back then. But again, nowadays I probably just wouldn't unban Wobbling. I would keep things as they are, because we've, you know, the damage has been done. I don't necessarily think it's damage. I think it has been a net good for most people's experience of the game. I just have like moral issues with it, because like I said, I cannot find the good objective argument for it. I'm sure there's some arguments that I haven't talked about yet, but let me assure you, I've read all of them. So if you want to discuss it more in the comments, let me know. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at now with Wobbling and how things have been going. I think also what people like to talk about is that, oh, Ice Climbers players have gotten so much better at the game, we did them a favor banning Wobbling. And I feel like this argument often comes from like a somewhat disingenuous point of view, of like, oh yeah, like we forced this on you and now like you do other cool stuff that we find cooler, so this was good for you. I don't think like taking something away from people that they seem to have enjoyed and then saying, oh, this thing you're doing now you seem to enjoy better. It's first of all a little bit of survivorship bias, because like I said, most Ice Climbers players quit. So those who did quit after the Wobbling ban, you can't tell them that, you know, they're now playing a more fun game because they aren't playing the game anymore. And also, I think this is just what would happen if we banned any kill move, right? If we look at Foxes who like played in Europe before Europe started playing the American version of the game, these Foxes would play the European version of Melee, or, you know, the PAL version, which isn't just European, but it was like the non-American version and non-Japanese version, where Fox's up smash was just weaker. So like on a stage like FD, you know, you'd have like a Fox and a chain grab, and right now, since I'm playing the American version right now, I can just up throw them at like 85% and then up smash and they die, right? But let's assume my up smash is weaker and only kills them if they had like 15% more, right? Then I would have to find more creative ways to get my KO off of this. I might have to like figure out a way to get an up tilt into an up air, or I might have to get better at like doing the forward throw tech chase to get more damage and then get the up smash. Yes, this will make the Foxes better players to an extent, because it will force them to consider tools that they previously hadn't considered, or that other people don't have to consider. And if you have a strong tool in your arsenal, you will usually try to play to that tool, right? Like that's what a meta game is recognizing what a character can do well and trying to exploit what they do well while minimizing their weaknesses. So that's what Ice Climbers players, like what they were doing when Wobbling was legal. They would try to play towards the strength of Wobbling, but because it was such a centralizing option in the Ice Climbers metagame, they would look for it so hard that sometimes they would try to force a wobble in a situation where a different combo route that would have been a lot harder and, you know, not a guaranteed KO would have been better. And that's what we're doing now. Ice Climbers still have really strong punishes off grab. The way it works now is that you're allowed to do 3 pummels in a grab and 3 nana attacks. So I can do something like this, right? And then after my 3rd pummel and 3rd nana attack, I have to throw the opponent. So I can't just KO them instantly, but I can get like a solid 20 to 30 damage and then play 1 mix-up, and if I win the mix-up I can do the same thing again. So usually you can still KO people off of 0 with a grab, but you need either good RNG, like really good RNG, you need to get like a 50% chance happening like in your favor twice in a row, and then you need to execute on it correctly, which is a lot harder than wobbling. Or you need to play a mix-up like the down throw down air thing, or a different like a regrab mix-up where the opponent can actually like DI and smash DI your attacks, so it's closer to what actual combos are like. So yes, I think Ice Climbers players have gotten a lot better at the game, and I also think that the people who gravitate towards playing Ice Climbers, that has changed. Because like I said back then, people who were interested in performing in Infinite and playing around that Infinite would pick Ice Climbers, but nowadays, like, you know, the people who pick ICs are more the ones who are interested in the technical aspects of them, and like who know that they can't just shield grab wobble people. They know that they have to learn like all the intricacies of controlling 2 characters at the same time. So in a way, what people tend to enjoy about the character from a spectator perspective is much more prevalent now. So I think the wobbling ban was probably a net positive in terms of, you know, just utilitarian perspective, how many people were affected positively versus negatively. Yeah, but you know, like I said, I don't like the way we went about it. Just a few people complaining, everyone was like, oh yeah, actually we don't like this, let's ban it. But I mean, that's how the game is, right? If a tournament organizer doesn't like something, they have the power to ban it, just like they have with certain individual players. So this is where we are now, and yeah, I think any character would benefit in a weird way from banning one of their strongest combo finishers for a while and then re-allowing it. So if wobbling was legal now, I think Ice Climbers would be way, way better, but they still wouldn't be the best in the game. Anyways, I've been rambling for a while now. I'm sure I missed some stuff, but yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about wobbling, and I'll talk to you all next time.